Fighting again in terms of that Chinese stimulus. In fact, let's discuss that and more with our next guest. Andy Rothman, China strategist at Matthews Asia, is with us now. Andy, great to have you with us on the program this morning. And that's really the question, right? Now the Chinese are finally talking about looser monetary policy and unconventional countercyclical measures. What would you expect? We have this big meeting coming up later this week as well.
That's right. Great to be with you. Thank you. I think expectations are high, and I would caution people to maybe bring those expectations down a little bit in terms of timing. The language from the Politburo meeting a day ago was very constructive, as you said, talking about more stimulus, especially on the monetary policy side. But I think that what's more important than monetary policy, which is already quite loose, is the leadership of the Chinese government restoring confidence among Chinese entrepreneurs, because these small businesses are the people that employ 90% of the workforce, drive all the innovation and all the wealth creation in China, and they've really lost confidence. Consumer confidence as well is at rock bottom levels. So that needs to get turned around for monetary policy to work. Now, the language that we heard from the Politburo was quite constructive and forward-leaning, but I just came back from a week in China, and my conversations with officials there leads me to believe that we need to be patient. We're probably going to have to wait until March to actually see implementation of more stimulus.
Okay, all right. Hi, Andy. Good morning and good to see you in. So what about positioning then? The Chinese economy is clearly weak, and you're hinting that maybe, in fact, it's not collapsing. From an equity market perspective, there's been this toss-up between India as well as China. If you look at it in the last 3 years, well, we have gone all guns blazing and we're far outperforming that equity market. But in the last 3 months, because of these measures that you just spoke about that are taken on ground and because of the valuations, there is that bit of a shift towards China. So at current reckoning, what's your take? Which side would you be leaning towards?
Well, I agree that, while the Chinese economy is a bit weak, it's far from collapsing. We can look, for example, at the first 10 months of this year. Retail sales are up, of goods are up about 4%. Retail sales of services are up almost 7%. Electric vehicle sales are up about 50% year over year and account for almost half of all auto sales in China. So there are parts of the economy that are doing pretty well, but the market has really lagged behind. Earnings growth has been terrible. So what we're really waiting for is to see more stimulus, and especially, as I said, more rhetoric from the government to persuade private businesses in China, the overwhelming majority of businesses, that the regulatory environment in China, which has been really chaotic and untransparent the last few years, is going to be much better. And then we will see things come back, but probably not until around March.
In that case, would you bet on India?
I'm kind of boring. I just focus on China, so I won't be able to make a comparison between one or the other. And I also don't think that China and India are a zero-sum game. There's plenty of room for both. Maybe the biggest contrast between the two is simply valuations. Valuations in India, as you know, have gotten quite expensive, whereas in China, they're still quite cheap right now.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, China does have that on its side. Very attractive valuations. But, Andy, what will it take for the market's interest to sustain in China? We've had a lot of false starts since September, right? It's sort of, stop and start, and then it's not sustaining because the market's not satisfied with the kind of announcements and the kind of measures that are coming out. So what kind of actual policy measures will keep the bulls' interest intact? And also talk to us a little about the whole tariff war situation, right? And it's really playing out. Look at this. I mean, the headlines are full of it that now China wants to investigate NVIDIA for antitrust. And then, Mr. Trump is promising higher tariffs come January. So how does that play into the fact that we're getting these policy announcements perhaps this week and how you're summing up the economy there?
Lots going on right now in China and between Washington and Beijing.
Yeah.
I think for markets, the most important elements are going to be, does the Chinese leadership do enough to get confidence back among consumers and entrepreneurs? That will lead companies to start hiring again, start investing. You'll start to see stronger wage growth. You'll start to see earnings improve. And with valuations relatively low, that's what's necessary to get investors back interested again. The US-China part's interesting as well, because frankly, we just don't know what Donald Trump is going to do when he takes office in a few weeks. It's possible that Donald Trump himself isn't sure what he's going to do. When we listen to him talk about tariffs, he goes in many different directions, sometimes in the same interview. Sometimes he talks about tariffs as a negotiating tool. Sometimes he talks about using tariffs to achieve a specific objective with respect to drugs or immigration. Other times he talks about just bringing a lot of money so he can reduce personal income tax in the United States. So we're not sure what he's going to do. But when I was in China last week, the point I made to my contacts in the government there is spend less time worrying about Donald Trump. Spend more time getting your own house in order, because the biggest part of the Chinese economy, the driver of jobs and wealth and innovation, is domestic demand. And if they can fix that, then dealing with Donald Trump becomes much easier.
Absolutely. That's probably a great prescription for the policymakers out there. Let's see sort of how they look at it. Stimulate demand, domestic demand. That's been the biggest ask for China. Thank you very much for joining us, Andy, and we hope to hear more from you as some of these US-China parleys continue to roll out as well. Thanks for joining in today. Well, with that, we move on quickly. Let's tell you